The knock came at exactly 3:17 a.m. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 slow taps against the front door. I was still half asleep, staring at the red digits of the alarm clock when I heard it. The house was silent otherwise. No wind, no cars, no distant dogs. Just that knock, measured and patient like it had all the time in the world. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move at first. My breath felt too loud. The kind of silence where you feel watched, even with your eyes closed. Then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach tightened. Nobody knocked like that. Not on Christmas night. Not in the middle of nowhere. I slid out of bed and crept to the hallway. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, betraying me. I paused, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No shuffling. No voice. Just the door waiting. I leaned toward the peephole, my eye hovering inches away. That's when something whispered from the other side. Not loud enough to understand. Not close enough to feel real. Just enough to make my skin crawl. Please. I froze. The voice sounded wrong, thin, stretched, like it was being pulled through something tight. My hand hovered over the deadbolt. I don't know why I opened the door, but as my fingers touched the lock, the whisper came again, closer now. Let me finish knocking. And suddenly, I knew. Whatever was outside had never left. I didn't move right away after the whisper. I stood frozen in the narrow hallway, my hand hovering inches from the deadbolt, my breath shallow enough to hurt. The front door loomed in front of me, tall and plain, its white paint chipped from years of neglect. It looked normal. Too normal. Like it hadn't just spoken. Outside, the night was dead quiet. No wind through the trees. No distant highway hum. Even the insects had gone still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Please, the voice had said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. That was what scared me most. It sounded patient. Certain. I stepped back slowly, every muscle tight, until my shoulders brushed the opposite wall. The floor creaked and I flinched, waiting for the knock to come again. It didn't. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time felt thick, syrupy. I stared at the door until my eyes burned, half expecting the handle to turn on its own. When nothing happened, I told myself the truth I wanted to believe. You imagined it. I returned to my bedroom and locked the door, though the gesture felt childish. I sat on the edge of the bed until dawn, watching gray light seep through the curtains, replaying the sound of that voice in my head. By morning, it already felt unreal, like something remembered from a bad dream. That's how it started. 3 weeks earlier, I'd arrived at the house with everything I owned packed into a rented truck and my life reduced to cardboard boxes. The place sat alone at the end of a narrow gravel road, surrounded by bare winter trees. No nearby houses. No streetlights. Just woods and silence. The realtor had smiled too hard when she handed me the keys. People say it's peaceful, she'd said. I needed peaceful. After the divorce, after months of sleepless nights in an apartment full of echoes, I wanted somewhere quiet enough to disappear into. Christmas was coming, but I didn't care. Holidays were just noise now, reminders of things already broken. The first few nights were uneventful, almost comforting. The house made the usual old house sounds. Pipes ticking, wood settling. I chalked it up to age. Then came the footsteps. The second week, I woke just after midnight to the sound of slow pacing on the front porch. Heavy steps. Deliberate. I lay still, listening, my heart hammering. When I finally looked out the window, there was nothing there. No footprints. No movement. The next night, I heard scratching near the kitchen window. Again, nothing. By the third night, I stopped checking. I told myself it was animals, or branches, or stress finally catching up to me. Christmas Eve arrived quietly. Snow dusted the ground in thin, uneven patches, just enough to soften the edges of everything. I ate a cold dinner, ignored my phone, and fell asleep on the couch with the TV on low. That's when the knocking started inside the house. Tap, tap, tap. I jolted awake, heart racing, staring into the dark living room. The sound hadn't come from the door. It had come from the wall behind me. I sat there, frozen, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. When I stood up, the TV screen went black. I was certain I hadn't turned it off. My reflection stared back at me. Wide eyes, pale face, someone I barely recognized. I checked every room. Closets empty. Bathroom silent. Bedroom untouched. No signs of anyone else. Still, I didn't sleep. At 3:17 a.m., the knock came at the front door. 3 slow taps. That was when the whisper followed. By morning, I felt hollowed out, like something had reached inside me and scooped away my sense of certainty. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out wrong. Later that day, I drove to the nearest house and met Mrs. Calder. She was older than I expected, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp and watchful. When I mentioned the knocking, her expression changed instantly. "You didn't open the door, did you?" she asked. "No," I said. Her shoulders sagged with relief. "Good." That was all she would say. She closed the door soon after, leaving me standing on her porch with more questions than answers. Back home, I noticed the scratches. They were on the inside of the front door, carved lightly into the wood, shallow enough to miss unless the light hit them just right. I ran my fingers over the grooves, my stomach twisting as the words became clear. "It counts when you hear it." My phone rang behind me, making me jump. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. The line crackled softly. Then a voice spoke. Quiet, close, familiar in the worst way. "Why didn't you open the door?" The call ended before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling, the house suddenly feeling much smaller. That night, as darkness settled in, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was only waiting. And whatever was counting had already reached one. I stopped sleeping after that. Not because I couldn't, but because every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was giving something permission. Like sleep was an unlocked door I didn't know how to close anymore. The knocking came every night after that. Not always at 3:17, but always close enough that my body learned to dread that hour. Sometimes it was the front door. Sometimes the back. Once it came from the ceiling above my bed, each tap vibrating through the plaster like a fingernail pressed from the other side. Tap, tap, tap. Always 3. I tried to record it. Set my phone on the counter, hit video, waited in the dark. When the knocking came, I nearly cried with relief. Proof. Something real. But when I checked the recording later, there was nothing. Just me breathing. Just silence. The house knew when I was listening. During the day, the quiet felt different. Heavy. Pressed down. I caught myself checking doors I'd already locked. Windows I'd already sealed. Things didn't stay where I left them. A chair angled slightly toward the hallway. The bathroom mirror fogged when no one had showered. And the whispers started. Not voices exactly. More like thoughts that didn't feel like mine. Soon. You hear me now. It's almost time. On the 3rd day, I went back to Mrs. Calder. She didn't invite me in. She stood half hidden behind the doorframe, chain still latched, eyes darting past me toward the trees. "It's knocking every night," I said. "Inside the house." She swallowed hard. "Then it's counting." "What does that mean?" Her fingers tightened on the door. "It means you're listening." That was the most she'd say, until I mentioned the scratches on my door. Her face drained of color. "It writes when it's close," she whispered. "You should have seen the others." "Others?" She hesitated too long. "People who lived here before me," she finally said. "Before you. Before the man who died." That night, I searched the house from top to bottom. That's when I found the floorboard. It was loose in the hallway, right where the knocking sounded strongest. Beneath it was a narrow gap, and inside that gap was a notebook wrapped in oilcloth, yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting was frantic. Uneven. Words pressed too hard into the page. First night. It knocks. Second night. It knocks closer. Third night. It asks. I turned the page. Do not answer. Do not speak back. It learns your voice. The last few pages were ripped out. As I stood there reading, I heard it. Not knocking. Breathing. From the other side of the hallway wall. Slow. Controlled. Like it was listening to me now. I backed into the living room, heart pounding, and that's when my phone rang again. Unknown number. I didn't want to answer. I did anyway. Why are you hiding? The voice asked. It sounded exactly like me. I dropped the phone. That night, the knocking changed. It wasn't patient anymore. Tap, tap, tap. Then, tap. A fourth knock. I screamed for it to stop. The house went silent. Too silent. And in that silence, I understood something that made my stomach twist. It wasn't trying to get in. It already was. The knocking was only how it reminded me. On the second night after that, Mrs. Calder came to my house. She stood just inside the doorway, pale and shaking, refusing to step farther. It's your third cycle, she said. If it reaches the end, it won't need the door. What happened to the others? I asked. She looked at the hallway. At the wall. They didn't disappear, she said. They stayed. That night, the knocking came from inside my chest. Tap, tap, tap. In time with my heartbeat. And somewhere deep in the house, something whispered, pleased and certain. Almost finished. The house did not feel like a house anymore. It felt like a body. Every wall hummed softly, like something alive beneath the plaster. The air was warmer than it should have been, thick and stale, carrying the faint smell of old wood and breath that didn't belong to me. I stood in the hallway, notebook clutched in my shaking hands, listening to my own heart knock against my ribs. Tap, tap, tap. I hadn't heard it with my ears that time. I felt it. The lights flickered, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the hallway, absolute and heavy. My phone screen lit up on instinct, casting pale light over the walls, and that's when I saw the doors. They were all open. Every single one. The bedroom door I knew I'd locked. The bathroom door that never stayed open. Even the small storage room at the end of the hall, its door yawning wide, revealing darkness that felt deeper than the space allowed. Stop, I whispered. The word felt wrong in my mouth, like I'd spoken out of turn. From the living room, something shifted. Slow footsteps. Careful. Deliberate. Not approaching. Circling. I backed toward the front door, every nerve screaming at me to run, but my feet felt heavy, like the floor was gently pulling me down, urging me to stay. The closer I got to the door, the louder the knocking inside my chest became. Tap, tap, tap. The deadbolt began to turn on its own. No, I said, louder this time. I didn't open it. A voice answered from everywhere at once. You heard me. The door creaked open an inch. Cold air rushed in, sharp and biting, carrying the smell of snow and something older. Dust, rot, forgotten winters. I slammed my hand against the door, pushing it shut, fumbling with the lock. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. Something stood very close. I didn't turn around. You promised, the voice whispered. I never promised anything. A pause. Then a soft, disappointed sound. That's what they all say. The knocking erupted, no longer measured, no longer patient. It came from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, overlapping rhythms colliding into a single overwhelming pulse. Tap, 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 tap. I screamed, covering my ears, but the sound didn't come through the air. It vibrated through bone and blood, through memory and fear. The house bent. Hallways stretched. Doors sliding farther away no matter how fast I ran. The living room opened into a space that didn't exist before. Longer, darker, lined with shadows that twitched when I wasn't looking directly at them. I saw people there. Not clearly. Just impressions. A man standing near the door, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. A woman curled against the wall, hands over her ears. Others, shapes half-formed, incomplete, like they'd been erased before they were finished. They heard me, the voice said gently. Just like you. What are you?" I sobbed. Something stepped forward. It wasn't solid. Not fully. It was a silhouette carved out of absence, darker than the dark around it. Its edges wavered, like smoke trying to remember a shape. Where its face should have been, there was nothing, just a depth that made my head ache to look at. "I'm the sound that was ignored," it said. "I'm the door that stayed closed. I'm every knock that went unanswered." It raised its hand. Tap. The sound landed directly against my chest. My vision blurred. Memories surfaced that weren't mine. People lying awake at night, hearing knocks they chose to ignore. Fear. Guilt. Relief. And then the slow realization that the sound had followed them anyway. "You don't take people," I whispered. "You replace them." The thing tilted its head. "You understand." The notebook slid from my hands and opened on the floor. Pages fluttered wildly until they stopped on the final one, the page that had been torn out before. The words burned into my eyes. "It ends when the knock is answered, or when someone becomes it." The knocking slowed. Tap, tap, tap. Waiting. I felt it then, the truth settling heavy and inevitable. I could run. I could scream. I could barricade doors until my hands bled. It wouldn't matter. The sound was already inside me, in my heartbeat, in my breath. I looked at the open front door, snow drifting in slowly, silently. The thing stepped back, giving me space, giving me a choice it already knew the answer to. "Finish it," it whispered. My chest tightened. My heart pounded once more. Tap. I raised my hand. Not to the door, to the air in front of me. And I knocked. Tap, tap, tap. The house exhaled. The sound rushed out of me, tearing something loose, something essential. I felt myself hollowing, thinning, my voice dissolving into rhythm. The thing smiled, though it had no mouth. "Thank you," it said. And then, I was the silence between knocks. The next morning, the house was silent in a way that made the ears ache. Not quiet like it had been before, when the creaks and groans of old would give you a false sense of life. It was empty, hollow, and expectant. I wasn't there. Not physically, at least. No one saw me leave. No one saw me at all. The front door hung slightly ajar, snow drifting in like a memory of what had happened. My car remained in the driveway, untouched, as though I had simply vanished. Mrs. Calder didn't stay long when she came by later that day. She peered through the windows, her lips pressed thin, and shook her head. "Another one," she muttered, almost to herself. Then she left, the gravel crunching under her boots sounding unnaturally loud in the empty air. People moved into the house eventually. A young couple looking for a cheap place far from the city. They found it peaceful, quiet, perfect for escaping the chaos of life. They didn't know the story, didn't ask questions. They hung stockings that first Christmas, played music softly, and laughed when the wind rattled the windows. That night they heard it. 3 slow taps. Tap, tap, tap. Patient, measured, waiting. The man stepped toward the door. The woman froze, hand gripping his arm. "Probably the wind," he said. And then, faintly, from somewhere behind the walls, "Finish it." The tapping continued, now echoing in rhythm with their own heartbeats. It didn't matter who they were or what they said. It only mattered that someone was listening. The house settled back into its hollow, patient silence. Shadows lingered longer than they should. The air held the faintest echo of breathing that didn't belong. And in the space between knocks, someone, or something, was waiting. Because once the sound finds you, it never truly leaves. It only waits for the next ear to hear it. The snow outside fell quietly, blanketing everything. But inside, the knocking began again. 3 slow taps. Tap, tap, tap. And somewhere deep in the house, a new rhythm began. A new voice waiting to answer.